as the designee of the majority leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. We're going to go after a handful of things, but we're actually going to try something that's somewhat unique for this body. We're actually going to use math. We're going to use facts. We're actually going to get the way the system actually works instead of doing what seems to be a moniker around here is we make public policy by virtue signaling, by feelings. So let's actually go over something that's been just grating on me, and I'm going to try to minimize being a jerk tonight. But if I get one more Democrat running around here screaming at us, we're going to default, da-da-da-da. You remember we got downgraded. That's not what happened. The language S&P did in 2011 wasn't because of the debt ceiling fight. If you actually read it, the U.S. loses AAA credit rating after S&P downgrade, but it was because S&P cuts the long-term U.S. rating by one notch to AA+ with negative outlook, citing concerns about budget deficits. Wasn't the debt ceiling. It was the failure of this body to take our demographics, our spending seriously. This is a decade ago. And even earlier today, I heard, I believe it was today or yesterday, I heard one of my colleagues on the other side walk up behind one of these microphones and lie. Excuse me, I take that back. Forget what actually happened. It wasn't because of a fight over the debt ceiling. It was because we didn't do enough to demonstrate to the debt markets around the world our own pension systems, your own retirement, other ones around the world. We didn't communicate to them that we were going to take the debt seriously. And this is a dozen years ago. The agency said the deficit reduction plan passed by the U.S. Congress on Tuesday did not go far enough. This is from 2011. And we still have members running around here going, oh, you're going to default, you're going to do this, oh, just do a clean debt ceiling. My argument is very, very simple. Do you not think the debt markets will punish the United States if we walked in and said, we're just going to keep borrowing? Just raise the damn debt ceiling. Just raise it. Do not take the seriousness of the trouble we're in, the demographic curve we have. Do understand 9 budget years from now, 9 budget years from now, according to the Congressional Budget Office from 3 weeks ago, you can get rid of all of defense. You can get rid of the White House. You can get rid of Congress. You can get rid of the Supreme Court. You can get rid of all of government. The FBI's gone, the Park Service is gone, Foreign Service is gone, all foreign aid's gone, money to Ukraine, it's all gone. Every dime is gone. There is no discretionary. You still have to borrow a couple $100 billion. And the next year, it's dramatically worse because the Social Security Trust Fund is gone, the Highway Transportation Trust Fund is gone, the Medicare Part A Trust Fund is long been since gone. This place is an economic fraud. And yet, if you listen to the speeches around here, we do beautiful virtue signaling. My feelings. Screw our feelings. Let's hold out a calculator. The cruelty that will happen around here if we don't take this seriously. Why is this place so terrified to buy a calculator or actually read budget documents? Once again, S&P, and I want to make sure I get this one right. It was S&P, it wasn't Moody's. Take that back. S&P downgraded U.S. debt in 2011. And the number of times I get from reporters outside, aren't you fearful you're going to get downgraded like you did a dozen years ago? That's not what happened. We got downgraded because we didn't take the debt seriously. And the numbers today are dramatically worse than in 2011. But is that the discussions you have around here? our brothers and sisters on the left saying, hey, I care about, we got to fix Social Security because in 9 some years, we're going to double senior poverty if we don't fix it because that 23, 25% cut seniors are going to take. Do they have a soul? Do they care? Well, if you cared, when the president gave his State of the Union speech, it would have been not, you promised not to touch Social Security and Medicare. It would be, we're going to save them. So in the president's budget, a number of my colleagues on the left have been running around saying, oh, they put in all this taxing to raise money for Social Security Part A. Remember, that's only 25% of the spending. 3/4 of Medicare comes out of the general fund. And over the 30 years, Medicare is responsible for 75% of all the borrowing. So when we get up to close to $130 billion of borrowed money in 10 years, remember, 75% of that is just the shortfall in Medicare. We got old, and we haven't taken on health care costs, and we're going to finish on that. But it just grates me that this place just makes up stories. We misinterpret because it would require reading and owning a calculator. Yeah, well, we're going to have to deal with the debt ceiling in a serious adult fashion. Fine. I also believe if we do not communicate to the debt markets that we're taking our debt seriously, that they're going to get paid back. Just raising the debt ceiling against, hey, it's a clean debt ceiling, just go borrow more money. You don't think the markets are going to punish or not punish the United States? We need to communicate. We need to demonstrate that we're adults, that we understand how ugly our demographics are, how ugly the borrowing is. Remember, last year I think we were borrowing like $48,000 a second. I get the clown show, it says, David, if you just didn't have salaries for members of Congress, that would balance the budget. Now, I know that's just a stupidity. They know it's stupid. But we calculated it was like 28 minutes of borrowing over an entire year. And a decade from now, it's like 19 minutes of borrowing. I think all foreign aid is like 14 days of borrowing an entire year. Remember, in 9 years, you can wipe out almost everything you know as government, and to have enough cash flow to cover all of Medicare, all of Social Security, all the veterans benefits, all the things that we have on autopilot we call mandatory spending. We still got to borrow a couple $100 billion. Getting the math right is moral. The avoidance and the theater that's gone on around here, we're saying we're going to get reelected because we're going to vilify vilify Republicans for even being willing to take on the discussion of how much trouble we're in. We're going to beat them up because they're talking about these things. It's absolutely immoral because they're letting it fester, and every single day the math gets harder. And I'm going to show some charts. And this isn't what I wanted to talk about tonight, but I'm finding I'm having to react to all the just crazy propaganda out there as my brothers and sisters on the left do everything they can to avoid the responsibility for what they did with causing inflation and the cascade inflation. You understand, the banking difficulties we have today are a derivative of inflation. You go, huh? Okay, inflation goes up. What do we have to do to knock down inflation? Well, we got two things we could do. We could really step up productivity so we make more goods and services to sop up all the excess cash and spending that's out there. Or we do what this lazy body's been doing for the last couple of years, and that is we'll just let the Federal Reserve raise interest rates, and roll off their books, so we're going to pull liquidity out of the economy. Oh, by the way, when you do that, I'm going to show some charts here. When you do that, what happens if you buy a bond today at 1% and 6 months from now interest rates are at 3%? You do functionally understand you lost 2/3 of the value of that bond. What do you think happened to Silicon Valley Bank? The banking crisis is an absolute derivative of crappy Fed policy, keeping interest rates at zero, and substantially displaced spending like crazy in the previous years, setting off inflation, forcing the raising of interest rates, and now interest rates, when they go up and inflation, create distortions in the economy. I think it was last week or the week before that, I came here and showed how much poorer Americans are, and they don't even know they've been taxed. I think I brought some charts that said, do you understand if you made $60,000 a year and you're in the mean of the country, not my community. When you're in Phoenix and Scottsdale, I've had substantially higher inflation than the rest of the continental United States. But the mean was what, 8, 9%. I take your $60,000, 1 year, if you're still making that $60,000, you're actually now only making about $52,000 something. Do you understand you got taxed and you didn't even realize? You knew you were paying more for your groceries and your rent and your electricity, but you also got to understand, where'd that money go? You were taxed. Inflation goes up. Your income, your savings become worth less. And who's the biggest debtor in the world? The United States. Guess what you did? We get to pay back the U.S. sovereign debt with deflated dollars. Or, excuse me, inflated dollars. Meaning, we took your money, put it towards the debt. Now, where we get screwed is we get to do that for a little while. You'll actually see this funny calculation where debt to GDP moves. And then the fact that we got to constantly roll our debt, and the insatiable appetite of keep spending, keep borrowing, when you're close to 30 cents on every dollar is borrowed. And now you have to sell the bonds at the new higher interest rates. And that's when it functionally eats your lunch. And I've shown over and over and over that it's not that long from now, interest will be the number 2 expense in this country. It'll be more than defense. So when you start to look, here's that point once again. So let's just pretend the inflation caused by reckless monetary policy and spending, da-da-da-da. So you take a bond. Let's take a long-term bond. It's $100. If over, it's a 30-year bond. You bought it in August 2020. Today, that same bond is functionally worth almost 2/3 less money. And this is just an interest rate differential, because on that 30-year bond, it's basic. Think of it, it's an annuity. Its value is the interest it throws off. The problem is you could take that same money today and get interest 3 times higher. You want to know about stresses in financial markets? This is it. This is a derivative of inflation. This is a derivative of our spending policies. This is a derivative of the Fed's policies. And I'll do a much better job in coming weeks sort of walking through some of the policy options out there. But you got to understand, you see this red line here? This is functionally what the CBO is telling us. And this is the moment where it's not partisan. It's us. We got gray hair. What we have 76 million baby boomers moving into their benefit years. This red line is almost all health care costs for our brothers and sisters who move into their benefits. There are proposals where you can at least flatten it out. And I'm going to throw a couple things that are just not often considered. I've done so many presentations here about if it's healthcare costs, disrupt the price of healthcare. One of the things you do is you cure people. You also legalize technology. But you got to understand how steep the curve is. And if I get one more person that comes, well, if we just got rid of waste and fraud, foreign aid, we'll be fine. No. I know it's hard seeing 14 zeros in your head, but that's the reality. I know these numbers are crushing. I know so many of us in the political class, we've gone up and given speeches of, if we just got rid of this, or isn't this an outrageous spending? They're all outrageous spending. Okay, fine. It doesn't actually fix the problem. So I'm going to go over some of this again because I have a new punchline. I did this a week or so ago, got all sorts of crap about it, except I have reconfirmation that my math was good. So let's actually take a look at the left's Inflation Reduction Act, which is the most Orwellian name in modern history. The cost estimates for the battery production credits in the Inflation Reduction Act, it was supposed to cost $30.6 billion. That's what they told us. That's what they told the American people. So we've had the economists breaking it down, looking at the numbers, and they're coming back saying, hey, that's not actually what the language in the legislation says. It's not $30.6 billion for the batteries. It's $196.5 billion. Okay. So maybe one of the first things we need to do around here as a body is say, brothers and sisters on the left, we're going to help you. We're going to hold you to your own promise. When we do our next budget, we're going to at least make sure these things are frozen where you told the American people they were going to be. Maybe this explains why so much of the lobbying class was absolutely giddy around here with the design of the Democrats' language on those legislations, because they knew it was going to call, they were going to get multiple to the multiple to the multiple of actually cash in their clients' pockets. You want to understand why the American people are so upset with us? It's scams like this. Well, let's actually take it a little bit further, and there's a punchline coming. Cost estimates on the wind. Okay, fine. You may love wind. You were told in the Inflation Reduction Act that it was the budget in there, the spending in there was going to be $11.2 billion. Economists are coming back and saying that's not what the language actually says. If you actually model it, it's $68.4 billion. Are my brothers and sisters on the left willing to say, hey, hold us to the 11.2, because if we start having this types of spending, remember that curve continues to just blow off the charts, and it will create more inflation, and you will be poor. And now we have others out there have been scoring. So when I did this a week or two ago, I got some lovely inbound from a number of leftist folks out there that think they're economists. Well, it turns out Credit Suisse, God bless their souls, actually came back and said, hey, you know, this actually total cost, CBO told us it was going to be well under $300 billion in total spending on all these clean energy, some tax credits. They're actually grants and other things, refundables. Credit Suisse comes back and says, nah, it's actually closer to $700 billion. And the latest update, Goldman did a complete workup, and they're at $1.2 trillion. You're getting the punchline here. When the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, we were told this was going to be well under $300 billion over a 10-year cycle of spending on all this green energy. Great. Actually, not great. I mean, I voted against it. It was absurd the way it was being laid out. You know, you give someone a tax credit for something they're already going to do. But that's the way this place works when you hand people cash because, let's be honest, they're big contributors. Now we're finding out the language and what's really going on in the marketplace. You're going from under $300 billion to possibly $1.2 trillion. $1,200 billion. $1.2 trillion. Okay? Will the Democrats work with us to keep their own words and their own commitments, saying we need to cap this, we need to put this back to at least what they committed to the brothers and sisters, the members here, and also the American people? This sort of stuff is you wonder why you wake up the next day and the numbers are just running amok. We get scammed. This just happen to be scams that are now well over $1 trillion. This one's a little hard to explain. I'll do it fairly quickly. There's this concept of nominal GDP. Hey, here's where we can be at, we can grow, we don't set off inflation. I've tried to explain this multiple times. Here's where the Democrats went and spent that $1.9 trillion a couple years ago. And you can almost see within the next day, the actual nominal GDP explodes. And this difference isn't economic expansion, it's inflation. A dollar goes up by 5% because of inflation isn't a 5% dollar more valuable. You've lost 5% of your purchasing power. I've had members here go, well, look how much bigger the economy is. No, it's not. It's not nominal. You got to adjust it back for how much devastation's happened in the economy, called inflation. And now think about what you're doing to people with the higher interest rates. So let's actually talk a little bit more about the Biden budget and some of the baselines we were given by the administration. So even with the tax hikes, remember, there's substantial tax hikes in the Biden budget. Remember, we're going to cut the deficit. No, they're not. Even with the tax hikes, Biden's budget would still cause the national debt to skyrocket $44 trillion over their 10-year window. That's their cut. There's no cut. And now what we're finding out is when we actually dig into the math, there's all sorts of just, what's the best term? Oh, yeah, fraud in that math. So you come to us and say, we're going to have, right now, debt held, and this is debt held by the public. And we need to explain this. You'll have many of us come behind the mic saying, there's 32 trillion of debt. There's offsets that economists say, well, it's the $1 trillion that are left in the Social Security Trust Fund. We don't count that as a stressor to the markets and society because we're just taking the trust fund over here and we're buying treasury bills, and then when Social Security needs it, they cash in their treasury bills. Sort of think of it as internal financing. These numbers are where you got to go to the market. You've got to find people here in this country or around the world who are saving their productivity, saving their cash to buy our debt. You're heading towards $44 trillion in that 10-year window. And an interesting thing, I was sort of working through today, so we made a slide. The Tax Foundation tried to work through the Biden budget on what would it mean, because you had people come here and give speeches about how wonderful they thought the Biden budget was. Well, now we got some scoring. Some of the cruelty in it, long-run GDP, long-run growth of the economy, actually shrinks by like 1.3% in the Biden budget. Wages, your salaries go down about 1%. And we lose about 335,000 jobs. This isn't us, this isn't the Republicans, this isn't the Congressional Budget Office, this is the Tax Foundation, which is nonpartisan, and they have some of the best modeling in the country. Look, stop making crap up. This is what their version, their vision of compassion, remember, we used to get the former speaker, show us your budget and we'll see your priorities, your ethics, your values. Okay, so losing 335,000 jobs and having workers lose 1% of their wages, is that the Democrats' compassion? This is what crappy economics do. So, President Biden's proposed budget comes nowhere close to solving the long term. Remember how they were just so excited? We're going to have $3 trillion if every dime of the almost $5 trillion of new taxes comes in, and I asked even Janet Yellen this, and she was very polite, completely avoided giving me an honest answer. Did you score what you do to the economy's growth? Well, you just saw on the Tax Foundation slide what happens to the economy's growth with all their almost $5 trillion in new taxes. But we're reducing the deficit. No, you're not. They just reduced how much more spending they were going to cause. They still raised the deficit by another $20 trillion. Once again, it's games with virtue signaling around here. This is their vision. When does it break? When do we break the back of this economy, the American taxpayers, the working middle class? How much more debt can we stack up on them? And if we do this, will we have any capacity to follow the Constitution, defend this country, and also keep the commitments to those who are Medicare or Social Security? You understand, remember the comment before, 9 budget years, you can wipe out all what you consider government. All defense is gone, all discretionary is gone. And you still got to borrow hundreds of billions of dollars just to cover Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, veterans benefits. President Biden's tax hikes would place significant burden on the American people. So they acted like, and I should have actually labeled this even better. You remember in the president's speech when, hey, here's my budget, some of the talking heads that were supporting it, you know, total revenues, we're going to get this. Well, what they forgot to tell you is half those revenues come ultimately in income tax hikes. And when you work them out, it's small businesses, it's individuals. It's not the big corporations. Half that revenue is just coming functionally from people's incomes, from their salaries. It's income tax hikes. So the federal government reserve outlook for 2024 growth has worsened significantly. All right, what does that mean? Okay, think of this. Do you remember way back when, last December? So how many months ago? It was, 3-4 months ago? Do you remember way back then, Congressional Budget Office, others, we were saying, hey, we're going to have 1.6% GDP growth. Completely anemic, dramatically lower than the long-term average, which we need to grow. We'll be happy to know, as of this month, it has gone from 1.6 economic growth when you adjust away inflation to we're down to 1.2. To anyone listening, do you understand how screwed we are if we don't get this up dramatically? And I'm sorry my language, I don't mean to potty mouth. I'm just frustrated because I don't know how to break through people mentally, because you're going to have this brain trust saying, yes, but if you got rid of this or if you didn't do that. And look, I understand many of the comments we get are just bots, are people who actually may be off their meds. But take this seriously. A couple weeks ago I had my 8-month-old here, and I kept trying to ask the moral question: do you have the right as an American to be secure in your retirement? Does my 8-month-old, my 7-year-old, do they have the right to have prosperity in their future? That 8-month-old, wonderful little boy, we're blessed to be able to adopt him. In 24 years, the taxes he pays will have to be 100% more, double what you pay, what I pay, just to maintain baseline services. Not expansion, not all this other crazy spending, just the baseline. That's every corporate tax, that's every individual tax, that's every... So I had this crazy idea. And I want to see if anyone else out there is willing to discuss this with me. Because every time I've discussed this, I look up and the room is running towards the exits. if you're a publicly traded corporation, you must actually now, according to what is the SEC and the Democrats, you have to disclose global warming, or environment, whatever we call it today. We call it climate change, and the stresses that could put on your book of business. Okay, fine. Disclose it. Should you have to also disclose the fact that over the next 24 years, your corporate taxes will double? What does that mean to your investment portfolios? What does that mean to your long-term capital outlook? What does that mean to your corporate risk? We're talking about, hey, shareholders deserve to have all sorts of disclosures. You know, environmental, climate change, fine. Should they also have to behave disclosures that explain what U.S. fiscal policy means to the future investments of that company? Why isn't it fair? Why does the left get to have climate change forced on corporations' disclosures, which I think, fine, I'm not going to fight that. But why shouldn't they also have to disclose the actual math that the Congressional Budget Office has put out that their taxes will double over the next 24 years? Why isn't that a disclosable item? It's worth thinking about. Fair is fair. If you want investors to know what the risks are of their investments, you know, it's like the brain trust here. I'm going to go buy a 30-year bond. Understand, by the time you get the final day of that bond, your taxes have doubled. What rate of return do you actually need? This is reality. It's math. Even confiscating. Now let's get this one straight, because I keep getting leftists, my Democrat colleagues, who come and say, well, rich people just need to pay more. Okay, let's just pretend that's the way it works. Even confiscating all income over $500,000 would fail to eliminate the fiscal year 2024 budget deficit. Get the punchline with me right now. This is the fiscal budget we're working on right now. The amount, and remember, in a decade, that number's doubled. We're going to go from about $1.5 trillion borrowing here to the end of the decade. Its best number was like $2.7, $2.8 trillion of borrowing. So just the budget we're working on right now, if we took, hey, you make $500,000 $1, we get that dollar. We take every single dime of people over $500,000. You don't even get near paying off the deficit. You get it? Yet, I promise you tomorrow, I'll have members of the other side who are going to walk behind these microphones and just say, if we just tax rich people more, we'd be fine. It's not the math. And I've come here multiple times and shown the entire list that if you confiscated every dime of the wealthy, yeah, you get another year or two on the paid off on the borrowing, and then boom, it's all back. It's demographics. And unless we as a nation have a revolution, is disruption too uncomfortable a word for so many people? How about an alternative way to change the price of delivering health care to our brothers and sisters? Because that's 3/4 of all the debt over the next 30 years. We can do that if we could have a disruption in the cost of health care, and it's not tomorrow, it's over the next decade. You're not going to pay off the debt, but what you do is the size of the economy and the size of the borrowing stabilize. Because the problem right now is that it grows dramatically faster than the growth of the economy. That's what crushes you. So I'm going to end on something I'm incredibly optimistic on. I've been mocked for talking about this, but it looks like it's heading towards its phase one. There's a company out there. They've been chasing this for like 15 years. There's stunning amounts of money and efforts have been put into it. They just got permission to start the next phase of a phase one trial. And the punchline here is this is joyful, this is optimistic, and it's moral. And it also would do amazing things on U.S. debt, actually for the entire world. So the concept here is a type of stem cell that's been tagged, I guess, with CRISPR. And look, I'm not a synthetic biologist. This is not my specialty, but I'm fascinated by it. And because the way they tagged it, you could get a stem cell treatment that gets your body to start producing islet cells that start producing insulin again, and you don't need anti-rejection drugs. It would be universal. That means there's this concept I've been reading about for a decade called a biofoundry. And yes, I am geeking out, but this is important. Turns out for every complex problem, there's a simple solution that's absolutely wrong. It's a complex solution that if we would actually do everything over the next decade to knock down pre-diabetic populations and then work with our brothers and sisters that have it, and the offer that at the end of the decade, if you improved your healthy lifestyle, we might get your body producing insulin again. Could you imagine the economic benefit? The crushing of income inequality to poor families that actually have someone that's severely diabetic, who's losing their feet, their eyesight. What is the morality for my tribal communities in Arizona? Also, it's the single biggest thing you could do for U.S. sovereign debt. And yes, this is just the beginning of the next phase of a phase 1 trial. And maybe it doesn't work. There's been so many heartbreaks in this over the last couple decades. But so far, the early data to get to this point is they've been given the green light about 5 days ago to start. This is the type of things we, as members of Congress, on the left and the right, should be bringing in people saying, is this a path? How do we help it? How do we do it safely? But we need to be starting to think through, what if it works? What have we done to change the way we deliver nutrition in this country? What have we done technology-wise that watch the things you can wear in your body that help you understand your blood glucose? What could we do to actually, what is it, and I'm going to screw up the proper name, but these new, they're pharmaceuticals that help some people suppress their appetite. Apparently they're safe, and apparently they come off patent very soon. What could we do to say, if this works, maybe by the end of the decade, we have a societal agreement that this is a deal because it would make the population so much healthier? And yes, there's dozens of ideas like this, but it's an example. It doesn't all have to be dystopian misery around here. What's the chance we're going to hold a single hearing and have a single conversation around here of something that's actually a potential solution? Or do we continue to just say, the debt's going to bury us, let's just keep spending because that's what gets us reelected, and God forbid we tell our voters the truth? Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, I'm going to yield back because if I keep going, I might hurt someone's feelings, and we wouldn't want to do that. So, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Does the gentleman have a motion?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House do stand adjourned.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow.